Ladies and gentlemen, this is Questlove Supreme, back on Zoom. You know, guys, I had a dream that we were actually out in the open, and we saw the world, and we saw each other, and we were doing these shows in person.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, with roll calls and everything.
Yeah, man, it was so amazing. Like you were there, and you were there, and you were there. It was amazing.
Was Bill there too?
I dreamt that Bill was there. You know,
Yeah.
I dreamt that
That's
he was
good
there.
dreams.
Yeah,
See?
it was amazing. No, it's good to be back. We're here with the fam. It's Bill, Steve, and Laia. Fonte went out to get some cigarettes, but
As always.
He's coming back faster this time.
he gives his regards. You know, I let me go a little bit off the rails. This might be quasi lengthy. But I'll say this much as a preface to this particular episode. I'm gonna start with a quickie personal story. And that story is basically so there's a gentleman that's been in my organization. His name is Silbert Mani. And Silbert, like the thing about the Roots organization is, you know, we work with literally the best people. And I've had very few terminations in my 30 years in this 30 years at the helm of this organization. I mean, yeah, some people like move on to do other projects. And for the most part, I'll say that everyone in my organization has done superb work and has been, you know, with us anywhere from 10 to 30 years. So when I say we get the best of the best, we get the best. Now, in the case of Mr. Armani, Silbert, he came to meet with us about potentially being the new Roots tour manager. And that being a tour manager is sort of like being the group's father, like what Dave Seville is to the Chipmunks. That's what a tour manager is, to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And that was the role he was filling in. And, you know, we are a professional organization. And, you know, job interviews are a thing where, you know, it's not like I'm in an office with a receptionist and a coffee maker or any of those things. But I am very serious about the tour manager position. And it's also been a very long time since we've had a male in this particular position. You know, I'll say over these 30 years that 80% of our organization has been run by women. So when Seal kind of came in this organization, I wanted to come with the hard questions. And I simply asked him one question. I said, what do you think you have that qualifies you to work in the capacity as tour manager for the Roots? And he said, I've been Public Enemy's tour manager for 15 years, 100+ shows a year, theaters, clubs, stadiums, worldwide, opening for the biggest rock acts in the world, like solo dates, all stops in between. He said, and never once has Flavor Flav been late or ever missed and before he said the last word, I was like, you're hired. That's all I needed to hear. And you know, when you as the patron, you go to Madison Square Garden to see, you know, a Kendrick show or whatever, you know, we praise artists and all the time, but we never ever get to see how the sausage is made. We never, you know, give praise to the tour bus driver for getting them there, or the manager for negotiating the right contract, or even the tour manager for getting the act there on time to give you your money's worth. So there's a new book that's been written by our guest today called the Fame Game, an insider's playbook for earning your 15 minutes of fame. And for some reason, I know that the "your" in the title is sort of implied to the artist, but I actually think that this book is meant for anyone who's currently an intern or an assistant, future managers, future publicists. This book is almost, it's an important, like I was reading it thinking like, oh, maybe I could use this when I get job 20 to be a manager, because you guys know I have 19 jobs. Okay, so before the rest of Questlove Supreme gets bored to death with this long ass intro, I will just say that our guest today has simply worked with the best, and his job is to be the person who is behind the scenes. that makes sure everything is running smoothly. And he's also the person that gets that 3 a.m. phone call when shit hits the fan. Name them: Quincy Jones, Don Cornelius, Herb Albert, Andre Krauss, Luther Vandross, Paul McCartney, Peter Frampton, Nick Nolte, Muhammad Ali, Richard Pryor, Bette Midler. Like literally, there's no one. Vanessa,
No one.
I can name it. I apologize for this long ass intro, but I think it's really important that I set this up. Please welcome to Questlove Supreme, the one and only super manager and Dr. Fix-It, the one and only Ramon Hervey, the second on Questlove Supreme. Thank you.
Wow.
Oh.
And the show's over. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
No, that was really well crafted. And makes a lot of sense.
Well,
Can I just ask, like, let me ask the final question first.
Yes.
What's your secret, Ramon, to being successful at what you chose to do all these years? Like, how
can I add to that? It's more why. Why would you want to stress yourself out with this job? You have the most dangerous job in entertainment. That's all. That my take after finishing the book was, why would you want to do that? What's your answer?
I think that over the, I kind of fell into it by accident. First of all, I never really wanted to. I didn't grow up to be a manager or a publicist. I was a flight attendant for Pan Am Airlines, and I ended up, flying to London. And I lived there for 4 years, and that's where I got my break in the music industry. And it was quite by accident. I was dating a singer, and her agency, I got laid off from Pan Am, and I was actually the only Black who was at that time, Pan Am. This was in the mid '70s, and Pan Am didn't have any Black people,
Right.
for the most part. They had very few, and they had no males. All the international airlines like Lufthansa, Air France, British Airways, they all had men, but there was no men in any of the American airlines. So I killed two birds with one stone, being Black and being a male. And that's why I got hired. And in fact, I always tell a funny story that I had a huge afro, and I used to have to pat it down because we had a 3-inch maximum from the top of your head to the outskirts of wherever your afro reached. So I used to pat it down, put water on,
or dippity doo, or
so
if you looked in the 70s and 80s, dippity doo was like your best.
Yeah, right. Well, afro sheen, whatever you could do.
All right.
But it was a great opportunity to see. And it just, when I got over there and this opportunity to work at this talent agency came up, I just found that I had a certain understanding of. I interacted well with artists. I worked with Bay City Rollers over there with this agency called Starlight Artists, and I worked with a group called Marmalade.
Yeah.
Bay City Rollers were supposed to be like the next Beatles at the time. But a lot of people don't realize they actually didn't sing on their records. There was two guys named Bill Coulter and Bill Martin and Phil Coulter, who produced and wrote 2 records for the Bay Rollers. And they got them on Top of the Pops or whatever. But in those days you could lip sync. Right. So they never had to sing. And they actually got, the first album was huge, and they never really performed. Almost everything they did was lip sync.
Are you disappointed, Steve?
I'm literally about to jump off out the window right now. I'm a big Bay City Rollers fan.
I know.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but
well,
no,
they must have sung a little.
By session singers.
You just Milli Vanilli Steve's dreams.
Yeah, they were before Milli Vanilli did the whole thing. So the second record was actually done after they got successful in the first record. They got kind of full of themselves, and they said, "Hey, we don't want to use these guys." So they fired them, and those guys went and got 5 new faces, some English guys named Kenny And that was one of the groups that I worked with over there. And then also I got to work as an editor for a couple of music magazines. So I just had a sense of that music was maybe in my destiny, of
But
relating to
when?
artists. And
But when, Ramon? Because you were a flight attendant first, but
Yeah, and
before flight
yeah, and
attendant,
then I
like
got
what
laid
was?
off.
But before
what
flight, like I'm sorry, Amir, but I think we're going in the same direction. But go ahead.
what year was it that you did your time in London to start
from
this?
from 1973 to 1977.
Oh wow. Okay.
So,
Good time to be there.
the music scene was really vibrant then. Bowie and, Alvin Stardust and Gary Glitter. And I mean,
Yeah.
the Rolling Stones. I remember seeing the first time I saw Billy Preston, he opened for the Rolling Stones at Wembley. That was in the 70s, and he was just incredible. I thought he blew him off the stage, to be honest. But it was just a hotbed of music. I mean, I got to see some of the best I saw Elton John at the peak of his career back then at the was the Rain. Uh, it's one of the most famous concert halls in London. I forget the name. It begins with an R.
Royal Albert Hall.
Royal Albert Hall. Yeah,
Yeah.
Royal Albert Hall. And
Well, I'm
he was amazing.
well, first I'm fascinated. I know that because of your Pan Am experience, like you go back and forth to London a lot, but it's just so like
No, I
I
was
thought
based
my
there. I
story,
lived there for that whole time.
Right. But
right,
you
but
didn't get to
I'm
pick it. He didn't even get to pick it. You didn't even know you were going to be there because people don't know that part about being a flight attendant, right? They just said go.
Well, we had three bases to choose from.
Okay.
It was Washington D.C., Boston, or London.
where were you born, first of all? Like what part of where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and my dad was in the service, so we moved around a lot. I went to uh, elementary school in Springfield, Mass.
Uh-huh.
And then he got transferred to Vandenberg Air Force Base. I went to junior high school up in Lompoc, California, which is about 60 miles inland from Santa Barbara.
Right.
And I went to junior high school and high school there. Then I went to Whittier College and, just a little bit east of, northeast of LA, and got my undergraduate there. Really went to school to be a lawyer. And then a friend of mine, actually Cheryl Boone Isaacs, who used to be
Yes,
the
president.
president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.
Yeah.
She was the first Black woman to do that. I met her in college, and she was from Springfield as well. And she got a job with Pan Am, and that's how I ended up. She said, "Hey, you should apply for Pan Am. They're looking for Black men." And I said, "Really?" And I said, and she had already been doing it for a year. So I said, "All right, I'll apply. What the heck?" I wanted to travel anyway. I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue my education. And so it was really from her that I got the tip that they were even hiring. And then I finally I got hired, and it took 6 months process,
Mhm.
3 interviews or some screening process. And they wanted to know, at that time my afro was even bigger. They said, would you be willing to cut your afro? And I said, well, no, not for you just to see it, but if you hire me, yeah. But
But
yeah,
was
so
it
that's how I ended up going over there.
but was
No.
there to make a move that bold, especially that early? I mean, okay, it's 5 years after what I consider the civil rights period of the 60s, which most people look at 1968 as sort of like a seminal year where a lot of revolutionary changes happened. But the difference between what you did and the difference between a lot of the artists that you represent, like as an artist, the first thing that entered my head was like, oh, fear. Like, I'm gonna be safe. Da 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 da. This is too risky. Why would I do that? Like it's very unusual. Like for at least I don't know many Black men are thinking international or that they could have a space in some place that's not the United States. But
Right.
what was it generally about you that thought bigger, thought more international, or thought that you could handle this? Because for me, like this is something that only white people would do, and not like who taught you to
And a
dream?
bunch of black women, because they were all going into
I
the
don't know. I
flight industry.
always had a feeling of wanting to be adventurous and try new things, try something, different that hadn't been done before. Nobody in my family had really traveled. I'd only been on an airplane like from LA to San Francisco. I'd never even traveled from one coast to the other, because when we came cross country, drove in a car in one of those little tent things that you prop up. It looks like a trailer. It's like
On the top of the car.
Yeah, it's like a tent that you build
Yeah.
up, and that's how we ended up coming from
West.
Springfield to east to west. So we didn't even fly any part of that trip. So
please don't say
just,
so. That was your first time flying? You doing the Pan Am?
Yeah, it was my first time flying. When I went in training, I was nervous about. I wasn't nervous about from inside in terms of like I felt I could figure out whatever. I just thought I'd always wanted to travel, see the world, and just get out of the context of just being a black man in the U.S.
Yes,
because I felt like in those times, everyone that's all they ever talked to you about was. It was a black white thing, and I wanted to see what I would be perceived differently in another part of the world, or what I would anyone even look at me as being an American.
Could you just talk about just generally? Well, now that you are a professional and you are a renowned, like a world traveler and whatnot, what are the basic differences that you could say were in London at the time when you first lived there, as opposed to now, where it's kind of like, the internet has sort of colonized the world, where there's Starbucks everywhere, a 7-Eleven everywhere, a KFC, McDonald's you get the same J. Cole record around the world at the same time. But for you in general, what were the most what's the difference in how your life was first living there as opposed to how it is now?
I think the biggest difference was two things that I noticed right off the bat. One is that for the very first time in my whole life that I could recall, I was in a pub and somebody asked me what it was like to be an American. And I went, geez, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that question. They only ever asked me what it's like to be black. I need to really think about that for a second, because I've never really thought of myself as an American, to be honest. That was like a big question. And that was part of the process of wanting to go there in the first place, is to see how I would be viewed. And so there was that part. But then on the black side, they were a little bit behind our civil rights movement at the time. So they didn't really see themselves, they just saw themselves as being English. And I remember asking a guy, what's it like to be black in England? Because the voices are different, the inflection, they speak English like English people,
Right.
It's a little bit different than us, and you have colloquialism and throughout different parts of, depending if you're on the East Coast, West Coast, but we're basically speaking a little bit different vibe than the way the English spoke. And so, but I kind of resented the idea that I was looking at them as being anything other than English. And I thought, weird. I just, wow. So you just consider yourself to be English.
Like
well, that's
equals.
great. I mean, it doesn't really work that way in the States, but more power to you if that's the way it works. And this was very early on in the embryonic days of me being there and just getting adjusted to, being in a place where it's the majority, the one thing about England that makes it easier and more accessible for Black people or American people is it is English. You are speaking English. It is their language, although it is totally different. Like when I was an editor, I had to learn to spell everything different because they don't pronounce everything the same as we do. Like I remember one of the silliest things. I was going to the movie theater. They call it the cinema over there. And one of the most famous squares in England is Leicester Square.
Leicester Square, yeah.
And that's where they have all the big theaters, but it's spelled Leicester. So I get in a cab and the guy goes, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Leicester Square. And
Ah,
he goes, I never heard of Leicester Square. That's what do you mean you never heard of Leicester Square? I mean, like, how long you been driving a cab?
Oh
He goes,
shit.
oh, I've been driving a cab for like 30 years. And I said, well, it's it's the square, Leicester Square, where all the theaters are really, it's all where all your big cinemas are, and your
right.
theaters. And he goes, oh, you mean Leicester Square? And I said, Leicester Square, that's how you say it? And I said, well, in the States, we would spell that, Lester. So why don't you guys spell it that way? And I just had to learn all kinds of different
Mhm.
spellings and stuff like that. But it
Yeah.
was also still easier than, like, say, my second language was French. But it was still easier to do that than to go to Paris and try to speak French, because
Me
they
too.
really had a snooty attitude about Americans trying to speak
Speak
French.
French.
They
Exactly.
immediately thought you were, persecuting their language.
Yes, it's the only language I ever learned too, Ramon. I
Yeah.
understand.
You
Yeah.
speak French?
Is je parle français en per, like on per, like oh, like
So that's a
There we
no.
go.
critique,
Comment
right.
from Bill.
Yeah. I mean,
Wait,
I'm an American
wait,
that
time
learned
out,
a
time
lesson,
out.
that learned a
Time
language
out.
in school.
Time out.
What do y'all think? Yeah,
Time out.
What?
Time
Yeah.
out.
yeah.
Steve,
Yes, Amir.
you have 20 copies of the Bay City Rollers' first album behind you?
Oh
That was such a long joke. That's been up there for like 10, 15 minutes. No one said shit. Finally,
Oh,
until this
wow.
moment. That was a long joke, man.
It's been sitting there the whole. I didn't even see him do that. I
Oh
didn't
my
see him
God.
do
You guys are
that.
the worst.
Like, dog, why do you have 20 copies of this
That's
record?
hilarious.
Well, first of all, it's more like 30, and I probably owned about 100 copies of this, and I give them away. I buy it every time I see it. So is this the album you're referring to? It's like, I believe it's like the first American.
Yeah, that's the
album.
first one. In fact, they really, because of that problem with the producers, the one show that everyone broke on and during those days was Top of the Pops, which was one of the most influential music shows ever.
Yeah.
In any country that I know of. I mean, you could really break and sustain a career just being on Top of the Pops. But they changed the ruling, and you had to start singing live to track on the show because of that, because they weren't the only ones that were doing that. And so the unions and everything started complaining, and they switched the procedure so that you couldn't lip sync on Top of the Pops. But for the first 10 years, I think that the show existed, it was always lip syncing.
Right. Well, I understand that they were lip syncing, but are you suggesting, or did you suggest that they had session singers in the making of the albums?
Their first album was completely written, recorded by session singers.
Okay.
You've been had, Steve.
Yeah. All right. Well, you ruined my
Sorry.
life. Thank you, Ramon. Talk to you soon.
And
Actually,
again, they had 2 records recorded, and they just put other guys together, and they used the exact same, they made a few tweaks in the second record that would have been the Bay City Rollers' second record. So very sorry to
not a new idea.
I was going to say that actually Ramon is right. That rule is actually what saved the Roots' life. Only because the French version of that show, we had a situation, and I explained it before, where Debrat was a guest on the show, and she wanted to lip sync her song, and they're like, no, you have to do it live to track. And she caught an attitude, walked off the show, and we got the call to, can you fill in her 18 minutes? And this is, long story short, the next day, like, the Roots could suddenly go from playing Elise Momar over in Paris to play like the Zenith, like their version of Madison Square Garden. So you're right. Like, some of those shows are like that, where you have to sing it, even if it's to can track, you still have to sing live to it. And so,
well,
Right.
whoever sang on this record, it's incredible.
we'll
Whether it's
get
them
them
or
on the
not.
show, Steve.
Yeah. But okay.
Yeah, they're
I'm processing.
probably pretty old now.
Well, Les McEwen, I think was his name, lead singer. He passed away recently.
Oh, did
Well,
he?
I would like to know, what do you consider the first step into your career path? like, how do you start inching towards the entertainment business?
I think the first step was that working for that talent agency in London, Starlight Artist. And so then I had been there for almost 4 years and had to make a decision whether to stay there and become British more or less, or come back to the States. And I really didn't want to be, there was a chance I could get hired back at Pan Am, but I felt like my time up there with Pan Am had kind of was over. I mean, I used to tell people I'm a waiter in the sky, because I had a college degree,
Right.
but all I was doing was I was really just a waiter. You just do it on a plane instead of in a restaurant. And I just felt like I didn't go to college just to do that job, even though it was a lot of fun. I got to see the world, and it was great. So when I came back to the States, and I decided I wanted to continue to work, in the entertainment business. But I had been an editor of those two magazines. They were both pop zine magazines. One was called Poster and one was called Superstar. And I was the only guy. I wrote the whole damn magazine, but I told the guys, I said, if you really want to, we have to make it look like we're a bigger operation.
Right.
And I don't want to have the only name in the, so what, if you don't have a problem, I like to make up some names of other writers. I'll still write it, and I'll try to write a little bit different, so it'll feel like we have a staff.
So you were basically Cynthia Horner was to write on magazine.
Yes, exactly. Only she was really the only, she didn't care. I cared. I didn't want to be the only person. But yeah, Cynthia Horner, wow, that's a flashback.
Yeah, if that's my dream interview, and she's too, she's very shy about coming on this podcast, and I think she just thinks like no one knows who I am, and that's not big of a deal. But this is literally the platform.
Oh yeah, no,
that she
I mean,
raised.
when you start off in the entertainment business in black press or whatever, everyone knew who Cynthia Horner was. I
Right,
mean,
you got to go through her first.
yeah, she was one of the, Right On was one of the top magazines for you to get exposure in if you're a black artist. So
Yeah. So coming back to the States, how much of a culture shock was it for you? Because I mean, you're living in London in a key period of development in the United States, like the Nixon period.
that's where I went to college, Nixon's college. I went to Nixon's college. That was
Really?
Whittier College. That's where he was. Yeah, he went to Nixon. He went to Whittier College, and they also said that he was from Whittier, but he wasn't from Whittier. He was from Laura Belinda. He was born there, and he went through the Whittier school system, but he didn't actually. He wasn't a resident of. So when all the shit hit the fan, they had a sign saying welcome to, right down their main street was Greenleaf Avenue, welcome to President Nixon's hometown. And then when Watergate happened, they tore the signs down. They said, well, actually, they went on a whole campaign really to disown him. And they said, no, he's not really from here. He's from Laura Linda. But he was really adopted by Whittier. So that was funny.
And rightfully so. So was how much of a
it was a big culture shock, because for one, the music was really different. I wasn't really in tune with all the music that was going on in the States then. 4 years is a big vacuum of time to lose connection with your roots. And one of the first groups that I fell in love with when I came back was Brothers Johnson.
Right.
And the song Get the Funk Out the Face.
Right.
But when I listened to it on the radio, the first time I heard it, and I had a British accent that I didn't realize it until I got back. And, some of my friends, well, what's up with you, bro? With this voice you got. And I was calling things petrol instead of gas. There's just little things that you learn just from, being in one place for 4 years, and I had to turn that stuff off and readjust it. And also I drove on the wrong side of the street in one time in LA because I was used to driving, and I was in the car with my sister, and she says, hey, you I don't want to scare you, but you're driving on the wrong side of the street.
Right.
Oh shit, so I had to turn, so little things like that. But I thought that the song said get the fuck out my face.
Right.
And I called a friend. I said, wow, man, music has really changed here. Like radio, like now you can say fuck on the radio station. I go, no, man, they're not saying that. They're saying funk. And I go, oh, get the funk. Oh, okay, I got it. But I mean, a lot of things had changed. And I got very lucky. I literally was working in a photomat booth. One of those
Those
little
little
huts.
yellow.
Yeah, one of those little huts.
I
And
miss those things, man.
it was it was in the hood and on Rodeo in off Crenshaw. It's right next to a Pioneer Chicken. And I was, I came back. I didn't come back with a lot of money or whatever. So I just got a part-time job because that job I could work from 3 to 8, and I could look for a real job during the day. And I was trying to be a writer. I was applying to Rolling Stone, through Ben Fong Tories, and trying to, but everything was on spec. Everybody said, well, the way we do it here. And I said, well, I need some money. So I found this job, and I said, I figured I'd only work there for a couple of weeks, which is what happened. I only worked there for a couple of weeks, but it was one of those crazy jobs where it was always getting robbed. And they had women there all before me. So they hired me because they thought it would be more, I'd be more intimidating. And I don't know why people would want to rob a photomat booth. There's not a lot of money at hand.
Wait, can you explain this to me? Because I was way too young, but like photomat those booths were literally like the size of telephone booths, right?
Yeah, I could barely fit in it. I mean, every time I moved, I knocked something over, my knees or something. But it was like just an easy job.
You would just take the photos, or like would you have to process the photos too?
No, it basically a drop off. It would drive by.
Okay.
So people would come in, they would bring their film, and then I'd give them a receipt and put it in. And then when the film came, delivery truck would come by and drop off the processed films. So all I was a cashier and exchanging film, collecting film, and then giving people their photos.
Yeah, after Back to the Future, I stopped seeing those photo.
Yeah, they were
mats.
around for a while, and
Right.
so I remember one time a guy calls me up and says, "Hey, we're going to come down and rob the place." And I go, "Oh, okay. Well, thanks for the heads up, And so I went and sat in Pioneer Chicken. I called the manager. I said, "Hey, man, these guys, I got a call saying they're going to rob the place. I'm going to sit in here for a few minutes and see if anyone comes by. If they don't, I'll go back in the hut,
Oh my God.
So it was just crazy. Now that was really culture shock, coming from, because I had not really lived in a black area like that. I wasn't raised in that area, and that was an all black ghetto area. So that was a difference from living in London. So it was a cultural shock on many levels. But it was while I was working in there, a photographer named Bruce Tolleman. I don't know if you've heard of him. Yeah, so Bruce Tolleman
shot the Jacksons and
he was a
Parliament
very,
Funkadelic. Bruce Tolleman.
Yeah, Bruce also went to Whittier College. So
legendary photographer.
Legendary, and he worked for he's got a great book out too, a great coffee table book if you haven't seen it.
I got that someone gave that to me for my 50th birthday.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a great
He was
book.
kind enough to sign it for me.
Yeah, and he's he's had a really stellar career, and he heard that I saw his name in the staff for Soul Magazine, Virginia Jones Soul Magazine.
Yes,
because I was going to try to write for that, and then I saw Bruce, and I called him up and said, "Hey, Bruce, man, how you doing? I see you're like a photographer, blah blah blah. I'm trying to get into business here." And so he said, well, I know, I think this guy, Bob Jones at Motown, who was the black publicist there at the time, he's looking for an assistant. Call me, or I'll call him, whatever. And Bob Jones called me while I was working at the photomat booth, and he said, "Hey, would you like to come in and interview for a junior publicist position at Motown?" And Motown had just moved from Detroit, and they were based. They moved into the CNN building on Sunset. That's where their first.
This was 77.
Yeah, this was 77. And they moved out of Detroit to Hollywood for the first time.
You got to explain something to me. What was the role of Iris Gordy? Because coming of age and being a fan of like High Energy, Switch, just a lot of those Love Smith, like a lot of those 70s Motown groups. Whenever in even Apollo, they would often go on Soul Train. I would hear Don talk about Iris Gordy. What was Iris's role in at least the mid 70s period of Motown?
I think she was more or less in A&R, artist development.
Okay, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Steve. I'm sorry, man. I'm still wrestling with the
You're
fact.
muted, Steve.
Yes, Amir.
I'm still wrestling with the fact that you have 30.
Dude, I got like the Spanish
Oh, wow.
45
You
of,
got a whole
of
wall.
Saturday night. Like, you don't understand what's going on over here.
Your
doesn't
background
sound-
of all we've been doing this for 6 years now, Steve.
Yeah.
You've totally outdone yourself.
But it looks like a filter, but it's not. It's actually
know, I
Steve's
know. It's
40
like a-
copies of the Bay City Rollers.
Bay
For those
City's
who are
Wall of
watching,
Fame.
I'm sorry. I mean,
like
just
even though
people got to check out this record
Ramon's my dream interview, I'm still like right now. It's taking a lot of rent space in my head. This
I'm gonna bring you a
collection.
copy. I'm gonna bring you a copy tomorrow.
Thank you,
Steve, is that your Shawshank record? Like you have to buy it if you're in the thing. Like you have to watch Shawshank if it's on. Is it the
Yeah,
same?
this is absolutely.
Okay,
This is the record I own the most copies of. It's an
Oh my
obsession.
God.
It
I hope
started
so.
it started with the 8-track. I had the 8-track of this back in the day. It was like the first cool music I ever heard.
Okay, let's not.
It's my first musical memory, Quest.
Shut up, Steve. All right, let's not get into the rabbit hole. All right, so I was asking, what was Iris Gordy's role?
I think so. I mean, it was, you got to remember too, this is in, I'm not from Detroit, it's a family business and there was a lot of Gordys involved with it. And when you come in my role as sort of a, not, I was just a burgeoning publicist. So
Okay.
I didn't even deal with, I knew who Iris was and I dealt with her very minimal class system at Motown. And,
So how was it? What was the modus operandi at Motown during that period that you were out there? I've heard stories about how they operate in Detroit and, they all used their IDs and took meticulous notes as far as like union scales and all those things. But what was your experience there? And what was the everyday operations like?
well, my primary job was to serve as a writer and a publicist for a lot of those junior, like at that time, Eddie Kendricks had left,
Right.
and David Ruffin had left, Edwards had left. So there was like 3 Temptations that were all working on solo records. Junior Walker and the All-Star, Dynamic Superiors, Thelma Houston.
You work with the Dynamic Superiors?
Yeah.
Dog, man.
I did their publicity. And I got all those second tier guys, but at the same time, I worked with, I got a chance to work with Stevie Wonder. And I got the chance to see the campaigns for like Diana Ross and the Four Tops and Marvin. And, so it was just, to be able to get, to have that access, not to
Right.
them. I wasn't out there partying with them or whatever, but just to have the access to see how they were treated compared to the Dynamic Superiors or Junior Walker and the All-Stars. And all those guys were frustrated. I mean, Eddie Kendricks used to just yell at me and just say, hey, I'd say, Eddie, look, I'm not in charge, bro.
Take it out on
Like,
you.
do you want to do the interview or not? If you don't want to do it, it's cool. I'll try something else. But they were all frustrated because there was such a, Barry had a really, it was like a university, but it was also like very competitive, and he hand selected who's going to be famous. Leon Ware, for example, I work with Leon Ware. Leon Ware gave Marvin Gaye "I Want You," that a whole album, and it broke him as an artist. He told me that. you know, personally that record, that record was meant for him. And Barry told him that, hey, look, I can release this record on you, and I don't know how well it's going to do. But if you give this record to Marvin, you're going to make tons of money. And he did. He gave the record, you know.
Yeah.
So he put people in different situations like that, you know.
I have a question, at least about the publicity. Maybe 12 years ago, I saw an EPK for Songs in the Key of Life, in which, I mean, they did this thing where they like rented out this ranch and invited all these people from the press and whatnot. And it's literally like they documented the press hearing Songs in the Key of Life for the first time, and, you know, faces on them and everything. And you're literally watching. I mean, they edited it nicely, but
right.
I remember Stevie came in with a weird cowboy hat on, like they were like on a ranch or whatever. But just in general, how, you know, was there much strategy behind how Motown operated, at least as on the publicity side of things, on how they operated and handled things? Or was it just generally?
No,
You
it was
know.
very structured and very restraining. For example, Bob Jones allowed to pitch any of the major white magazines. Like
Say what?
Bob Jones, who had been
Yes.
there for, like, I don't know, when I got there, he'd already been there for 10 years or something. He wasn't allowed to speak to Newsweek, Time, Life, all the biggest entertainment magazines. There was a guy named Mike Roshkin who was the vice chairman of the company, and he took control of all the major big artists, and he personally pitched those people. So me, as the lowly publicist that just came in, I was assigned to only deal with Black press, you know. So I dealt with, you know, Marie Moore from the Amsterdam News, Gertrude Gibson from the LA Sentinel, you know, all of Earl Calloway from Chicago Defender, and yeah, and
I
all the
know those
people
names.
yeah,
All
those
the local
people.
folks. I love that.
Those
I
are
know
my
those
go-to
are
guys.
legendary.
Baltimore Sun.
Yeah, Baltimore Sun, all those things. And I used to write what they call canned features, and they would use them verbatim and just put their name on it. But I didn't care because I wasn't getting paid any extra money, you know. So, but because a lot of the Black newspapers and magazines didn't have enough money for staff, you know, they're very limited in staff. So, but I dealt with Regina Jones and Steve Ivory and
Steve Ivory, legendary
yeah.
Steve Ivory.
Yeah. So all those guys were, you know, my go-to people. But, you know, I thought, like, for a young guy, I said, I need to do something more than just do Black press and really make a name for myself. And so I decided, without asking anyone, at the time, the Commodores were just starting to break.
Right.
They had their first hit single. I forgot what it was. It was before Machine Gun, but it was off their first album.
Right.
And they were starting to gain some traction. And so I decided I was going to call Newsweek and pitch them to do a story on the Commodores. And so I called the guy, and he says, he answered the phone, forgot what his name was. And he said, well, who are you? And I said, well, my name is Ramon Hervey, and I'm a publicist at Motown. He said, yeah, but I don't normally deal with anyone at Motown except for Mike Roshkin.
Right.
And I said, oh, okay, well, you know, well, I'm calling you. Are you interested in, you know, possibly doing a story, whatever? He goes, well, let me get back to you on it. So he immediately calls Mike Roshkin and says, hey, some kid calls me today, and I thought we had a deal, you know, blah, blah, blah. So then I go into Bob Jones, calls me in his office, goes, what the hell are you doing, man? You called Newsweek? I can't even call Newsweek. You're in trouble. I don't even know if I can keep you, if you're going to keep your job.
Oh,
He
shit.
goes, Roshkin wants to meet with you. So I had to go up to Roshkin, and, you know, I mean, he was kind of cool. He just said, hey, well, we have some policies here, some regulations that you need to follow if you're going to work here. And I said, okay, well, you know, nobody told me I wasn't allowed to talk to other media. He goes, well, yeah, there are certain things that we do here, and you're not allowed to talk to these people. That's what I do. And I said, okay, well, I stand correct. Thanks for the heads up. And, they didn't fire me, but I realized then I got to get out of here, because if I can't have that, any latitude to grow, then, and, Bob Jones wasn't going to give up his job.
Right.
So I just said, I got to find another outlet.
So you're saying that for entry artists at Motown and non A-list frontline artists, i.e. Diana, Stevie, there was a limit to where you could go. And I guess for you, the limit was maybe Jet or possibly Ebony, or I don't know if Ebony was considered.
Jet, and I don't think I was allowed to pitch Ebony. I was allowed to speak to Jet. For sure, because I knew Bob Johnson and Sylvia Flanagan, and they were
Right.
always trying to get money. And I was said, Bob, I don't do advertising. I do publicity. There's other people at the company that you need to talk to get advertising. But he was always saying, well, if we do a story, can we get some ads? And
I was just going to ask, how does that work with a group like the Commodores, in which, there's clearly a point where, like in '75, they were a black act, and then come '77, when that self-titled record came out with, Easy and Brickhouse on it, when they suddenly became like triple platinum, and they're in Thank God It's Friday, and Lionel's about to, spread his wings, then suddenly they only deal with the top tier, the guy above Bob Jones, which is
pretty much shifts like that. And you see how the hierarchy, but one of the highlights of my time at Motown was I got to work with Stevie Wonder on Songs of the Key of Life.
okay.
And I was in the marketing meeting that only someone of his leverage and clout could even demand. So he called a meeting, and he wanted everybody from all the divisions to come in so that they could tell him what they're going to do,
What the plan was.
for Songs of the Key of Life.
Yeah.
And that only, probably him, Marvin, Diana, probably the Temptations, the Four Tops, like the Jackson Five. Those groups could probably command that. Their managers could command that, but all those other guys, they would never get an opportunity to meet with the whole staff of the label. And one of the first things that Stevie said, and I was so hyped because I hadn't met him yet, and just meeting with him, and especially that album, I think of that album as probably the pinnacle of his career. And one of the first things he said is, okay, so just to set the tone for this meeting, I would like to request, I want a billboard in Times Square that's so big and so bright that even I can see it. And, he had that kind of charisma, and he was dead serious. And just the way that he commanded the meeting, I was so thrilled. I've remembered that line forever. I've even asked him a couple of times over the years, because I've had a great friendship with Stevie since that day. When I did R&B Live and stuff, he came and performed, and I just really have so much respect for him as an artist. Everything he's done with the Martin Luther King holiday, he's just had such an incredible career.
Yeah.
But that was a great experience. And then one of the problems with that album that a lot of people don't realize, it had a 24-page leaflet, songbook inside.
Remember?
Yes.
And when you add when you shrink wrap that with a double album, and then you have this 24-page, there were stories breaking in the news that there was more returns on that album because of the warpage.
Yeah.
And so I did some research on it to find out what was the percentage of warpage that comes with every album. And I found out that the percentage I was like under 10%, around under 10% of all the albums being released in those days there would be a warpage issue and returns based on warpage. And so I talked to this guy in manufacturing to get his figures. And then I was able to get a story in Billboard to say that the information was misinformed, and that the percentage of warpage for Stevie's album was not as great. It was on par with the same amount of warpage for any album.
Right.
And it was, so I turned around the
You
the
spun
negative,
it.
and then I got in trouble for that too, because Faye Hale was this elderly Black woman. She was the head of manufacturing, and she called me into her office and got pissed off that I went to a lower person in her to get information, and I didn't clear it with her. So there was all these kind of departmental things that I just, no, there wasn't a guidebook. They don't give you like you can't
Right.
talk to this person, can't do this, can't do that. You just kind of have to find your way,
Politics.
Pissing.
Politics.
Yeah. A lot of
Territorial
politics.
pissing. Okay, I want to move on past Motown, but since you're already there, I got to know this. Why did Motown never use a consistent manufacturer? Like, one of the weirdest things about Motown to me was, like, okay, with Steve with his 90 Bay City Rollers back there.
Yes, Amir.
I have a large record collection myself, in which I've purchased maybe I have 10 copies of Songs in the Key of Life, but
how many Bay City Rollers?
I know.
Why didn't they put Songs in the Key of Life in a box, like in a box type of thing?
No, wait, let me get my question now, Steve.
All right.
My question is that I know that obviously Motown had to use various pressing plants, independent pressing plants across the United States and the world, because the ink, like the fonts in the ink for, if you brought the album down south in Georgia somewhere, is different than if you brought it in New York, and different if you brought it in LA. And I just never understood why a label of Motown's magnitude never just had one consistent pressing plant. Like, was Motown basically still an independent label, even though they were the biggest Black label?
Yeah, that was, Barry I think he believed that he had more power, more influence as an independent label than he would if he cut a distribution deal. He would make more money. He was willing to take those risks that you're talking about of working with all these independent one-stops and manufacturing centers around, but and he couldn't compete. I think it was a issue of these bigger companies, taking a big piece of independent companies and being able to offer record stores and stuff a bigger piece of the pie. It was very difficult for him to stay independent. He wasn't the only one that was trying to do it, but it was very, very difficult. But I think that it was a numbers games to him, at the time, that he felt, that he was going to win bigger by staying independent than doing a distribution deal with someone.
And what was the logic and the reason for why Motown never registered? Like, every television appearance, I would hear like, and the Jacksons sold, 7 million units of I'll Be There. Like, it would just be like these really crazy numbers. But I know that Motown didn't even join the IRAA until like 1979 almost. So what was like the logic of not joining the Recording Industry Associations of America, and how did that affect?
I think it's because he didn't want to have to be certified. He wanted to be able to use his own publicity and say whatever he wanted without being questioned. I mean, that's the only thing that I could think of at the time, was he didn't want to have to rely on he could always exaggerate, and all the companies were exaggerating. I mean, the big thing in those days was to say that a record shipped platinum. And, it's not how many records you ship, it's how many you sell. But,
forgot about that.
They realize, they'd run these stories. Oh, so-and-so shipped platinum, but it returned gold, so
right.
What's, but
did you guys know the true numbers?
It was a big part of the record business then. So I think that he was part of, wanting to be able to control the narrative of what his company really represented in the marketplace.
Yeah, I was going to say, now with streaming, especially in the movie business, like, the one thing I'll never know is how much money my film actually made.
Exactly.
Like that's the one thing they won't allow me to do. I can't look at the numbers at all to see if we did 900 million or just 1 million. So
Right. Yeah,
is that
it's red tape. It's the
I
red
see.
tape of being involved in all, that's the same thing that you've been dealing with your film. That's been going on for years in the film business too, where they tell you, oh, well, we didn't recoup. The whole idea is, if you don't have to tell your artist, you don't have to quantify how many records, then you can also tell them that you owe us more money than you owe us.
Right.
That's what I think that a lot of why he had so much frustration with a lot of the artists, because the numbers didn't match what they felt they should be getting. And he got a bad rep for supposedly shortcoming.
His artist.
Selling everybody and not paying them what they were entitled to.
So what was your next step after Motown? Like what was your last period at Motown and what was the next step afterwards?
The next step was I got laid off because they were having a really tough winter, and they were owed a lot of money, in terms of, a lot of what people don't realize is when you're an independent company, you can't afford to not get paid for like 90 days. So they were being owed a lot of money because a lot of companies just weren't paying them. And so they had to lay off a bunch of people. And I was one of the people that was laid off. And Bob Jones was kind enough to, he let me write for some other magazines like Black Star. I don't remember if you remember.
Black Stars?
Black Star. You remember Black Stars?
Black Stars and Sepia. Yes, I remember them.
Yeah. So I wrote for that under a pseudonym. Ray Trish was my name. And he told me I could, he helped to introduce me to, he said, look, I know I can't get you any more money, but you could write for some magazines. I'll refer you. So I wrote for a lot of other magazines at the time as a freelancer, but I couldn't use my own name. And he told me that this company named Rogers and Cowan, which is actually a very famous PR company, they were actually the first independent public relations company in Hollywood. When the studios originally started, they controlled everything. They basically employed all the actors, and there were no managers and no agents and no publicists. And they were the first company to be an independent publicist, where big Hollywood and Robert Wagner and people like Paul Newman could actually go and have their own publicity. And at this time, there was an emergence of agents like the William Morrises, and all those, agents started around the same time. So he told me that Paul Block, who was the head of music over there, was hiring freelance writers.
Right.
And he said, we're probably going to hire you back, but this will maybe hold you over. And so that's when I went to meet with Paul Block to see if he would hire me to do some freelance work. And it was after work. It was like 7:00. I had a jalopy of a car. I had a Dodge Dart, and I didn't have enough money it had no reverse.
Say what?
It had no reverse. I didn't have enough money to fix it. So I used to drive around to find the right parking space. I couldn't do any valet parking or whatever. And I was driving around Beverly Hills to find a spot where I could.
You would have to pull up into a spot.
Yeah.
Or like
no
in
car in front
parallel
of me and no car behind me.
But
So
you couldn't
that's
even
why
go
I
in
did-
head first. You couldn't go head first anywhere because you have to back out. So
Yeah,
wow.
exactly.
All right.
So, I was waiting to get enough money to fix my reverse. And so I went to Beverly Hills. Their offices were on Bedford and Wilshire. And I went in to meet with Paul. And he was a nice guy. Didn't really give me any guarantee that I would get hired or not. And then I went back to my car, kind of a little bit deflated and disappointed, and realized that I'd screwed up, and I couldn't pull somebody had parked in front of me. So I had to back the car up by
Physically?
myself. And this guy saw me trying to, I was leaning and trying to get, those cars were kind of heavy. So this guy comes up and says, "Hey man, you problems with your car?" And I said, "Yeah, it's just, I guess it seems like my reverse is not working. I'm not really sure." I mean, I lied.
Right,
I
right.
pretended like I didn't really know what was wrong with my car. and he helped me, and I finally got out of there. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a call from Paul, and he says, "Hey, do you want to come in and work on I have a project that I think I could use you for. You know, come in and I'll tell you what it's for." And he says, "Well, he said, one of my clients is Paul McCartney." And I said, "Wow, Paul McCartney from the Beatles, Paul McCartney?" He goes, "Yeah, that Paul McCartney." And I said, "Wow, yeah, I would love to work on the Beatles." I mean, you know. So what I found out was that Paul had bought the publishing to the Buddy Holly catalog. So he had owned it, and he was doing a week of in a special Buddy Holly week in the UK, and he wanted a press kit put together. And so my task was to write all the materials that would go in the press kit for him to use to launch that week. And so that was my first project at Rogers and Cowan. And I didn't talk to Paul, but he approved everything that I did. And they ended up hiring me as a publicist based on my work on Paul McCartney.
For that Paul McCartney thing.
And then I ended up being like a day guy on Paul's account in LA. And then he had another guy working in New York, but Paul was really the head guy.
Okay.
I met Linda McCartney and Lee Eastman, his father-in-law, and there was a couple of meetings and on phone call and stuff. I didn't really get to know him very well, but I got a chance to work on his account, and I learned so much. I mean, he had one of the biggest publishing, MPL Communications. He owns so much publishing. It's just amazing. There's like books of it. And I got to see he owned like over 100 fight songs from all the major colleges across the US.
Really?
Division I schools. I mean, it just was unbelievable. So many songs.
Well, it said that he's the one that taught Michael Jackson about like the power of owning publishing.
Yeah, well, apparently what ended up happening was that he told him that Capitol had offered, to buy, for giving them an opportunity to buy their catalog back. Yeah, and he was telling Michael, I just couldn't I couldn't convince myself to pay that much money for songs that we wrote, and so he turned it down. But then Michael went back and told Mike Stewart. Mike Stewart was the head of publishing at Sony at the time, and Mike Stewart helped him purchase the music.
It's Paul's fault, man. He should have always claimed your legacy, no matter what. Yeah. Always claim your legacy.
Ramon, what's your take on people these days selling their catalogs and that being a thing that people do these days? Do you see it as fortuitous or not?
I think it's great for a lot of artists that are not really relevant, on streaming services and stuff. They're not making a lot of money, but these are companies that their job is to try to make money off their publishing, off placement and syncing and all that stuff. So I think it's great. I've seen it. It's amazing that they, it's a further development from when, I guess maybe 10 years ago, when Live Nation and AEG started paying huge amount of money for artist rights, to circumvent agents and, where they would, and labels, they wanted to really monopolize and control. And this is just another form of that where, publishing has always been an annuity for artists if they understood it, that it's something that lasts in perpetuity. And so I would always say, hang on to it. But if someone's going to give you $300 million and you're still going to, make money, that's a lot of money to turn down.
Spend it now. Yeah. I did that, right, Bill?
What'd you do?
Sold my publishing.
Did you sell your publishing?
I sold it.
So you could pay for the new house?
Exactly. All of it? All of it? Like,
because it's like the logic was they did the math for me, and basically the way I was going now, I would have gotten the full value of my lifetime work by maybe when I was 77 years old. So I could they did the math, like we can either give this all to you right now, like what you would make up into 77 years old, or we could just pay you off a little bit at a time, And the Roots are just one of those prestige artists that, like, selling records was never our thing. And I mean, for the most part, licensing, like,
But you still have to get permission for licensing, correct? Like, it's not full out. You sold it and they can just do whatever they want to with it.
I mean, we have a very specific arrangement, so I don't want my shit being used for like MAGA parades or
Right.
anything
That's
like
why I'm
that.
asking. But if I didn't
Right.
ask, you wouldn't have disclosed that information. I'm like, you don't want people out here thinking the Roots music could just be
Oh,
anywhere.
no. There's always sort of stipulations, like, depending on
Right.
what it is. I mean, for the most part, yeah, I decided to. It's not as big as a Bob Dylan deal or McCartney deal, but
you started in 1987, right, with the Roots?
well, I mean, technically 87, but we got our deal in
Wow.
93.
Ramon, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's 30 years for us.
Yeah,
And
so you earned the right to do that. That's why I'm saying that people, who've been in the industry a long time,
Right.
you guys have been, performing. I've seen you guys perform several times. In fact, we met, I don't even know if you remember, but we met when
Speech.
you were DJing, with Speech. Oh, you
Right.
remember that?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Okay.
I remember you well.
All right.
You're trying to act like
No,
you're
I just didn't know if you
under the
remembered.
radar.
No, I just didn't know if you remember how we met. But yeah, that was
I absolutely,
met.
yeah. You
Yeah.
the first time when I did Speech's solo situation.
Yeah.
So you start your book at a very curious place. You start with the Richard Pryor story. And that particular chapter, in chapter 1, to me, I was very curious about that, only because kind of one of the prevalent themes on this show that we often talk about, that I'm often curious about, is when a creative or an artist sort of subconsciously lets you know that they don't want to do this anymore. And oftentimes it'll happen. They'll react in ways that will let me know that. And oftentimes artists will self-sabotage, a good thing. And there's ways to do it. There's I mean, lightweight stuff like gambling. And for you, especially as a manager, I know that time management is also a way that an artist will express their unhappiness with the situation. I'm certain you've dealt with artists that last minute will cancel something, I can't do it. Exhaustion. I used to always joke that I always felt the Jacksons made up. I only knew the Jacksons got exhaustion. That's why, like,
that's funny.
Right.
Yeah, I work with them too.
Right. I've never seen the word exhaustion used so much whenever it's like a canceled Michael or Janet, like, oh, no, exhaustion. Okay,
Right,
whatever.
Right.
But for you though, just the amount of fires that you've had to put out with every client that you've had, like, it's like you're being sent out into the front lines. And you go off on, yes, Lai is holding up.
I'm holding up the chapter where he says a path of self-destruction can sabotage fame.
Yeah. So, well, one, I wanted to know why you felt this is a very unique interpretation of your life that isn't a biography or a memoir. And as I said at the top of it, I feel like this book is important for the future managers, or really, like, to me, I think it's important for interns, because I know every intern I ever met in 1993 is now a CEO that I work with. And it always starts with, hey, you don't remember it, but you came to my college back when I was an intern.
Right.
But for you, to be at the helm, especially like with the way you started that Richard Pryor chapter in your book, why would you want to subject yourself to that level of torture? And,
Well,
and, and not saying it's all bad, but like surely you have to be living every day like any moment I'm gonna get a call at 3 a.m. and I gotta put a fire out.
it did come to that, but I didn't think that going in. Like I had bright lights and I thought, wow, I'm getting a chance to represent Richard Pryor, someone who I really respected, who I knew about, who I was a fan with. He was given a black kid, young, still, by that time I was pretty experienced. But his manager, David Franklin, he made sure that when he said, Richard really wants you to do this, and we want to make sure that you're going to be the one to do it. We want you to be responsible. So I thought, wow, this is great, to have at that point, Richard was really, he was one of the top paid black actors in the business. He had been successful as a writer. He had a lot of success, and so it was like a real feather in my cap to get him as a client, and I was thinking, wow, I can do, there's no limits to what I can do with this guy from a PR standpoint. So that was where my thinking was like, this is going to be a great opportunity. I'm going to make him even a bigger star than he already is. And then when I got in the trenches, it wasn't quite the opportunities that I thought were there weren't 100% there because he was, very unpredictable and he was going through a lot of personal issues with his drugs and alcohol and stuff like that.
Right.
And you mentioned at 3 o'clock, when the first time that happened, he was supposed to do he had agreed to headline for the Brotherhood Black Crusade, which is a very well-known organization, fundraising organization, community organization in Los Angeles. And the guy named Danny Bakewell was the founder of it, and then still has kept the organization going. But Richard called, and at that time it was his wife, Jennifer. They called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're kind of giggling. I can kind of tell they're high and stuff. And they tell me that Richard wants to cancel his performance. It was like early Saturday morning, and the show wasn't until he wasn't going to go on until like 9:20 the next night.
Right.
So he says, well, we went to the doctors and he has gastroenteritis. I didn't even know what gastroenteritis was. So I had to look it up, and I said,
exhaustion.
Oh, wow, you have a stomach ache, basically. That's a fancy word for a stomach ache,
Right.
Medical terms. So I said, well, why don't you guys go to sleep and let's just reconnect in the morning, get a good night's sleep. I can call you around 11 and then we'll decide what we should do. I mean, you don't have to go on until 9 o'clock. Maybe your stomach will feel better by then. And I said, also, I really don't want to, he wanted me to make an announcement. And I said, at that time, there's no place I can go. At that point, there was no social media or whatever like that. And the only way I could break a story like that was I could go to AP, Associated Press, and, I could give it to them over the canceling this date. And I said, I don't want to do that. And I wanted to wait and talk to Danny Bakewell to see what he thought, what would work best for him. And so I did end up talking to Danny in the morning, and I convinced Richard that I would create a statement to be read, and that we wouldn't announce it nationally as a national thing. We just announce it at the venue, because a lot of people did, it was just a charity event, and not everybody needed to know that he was canceling it.
Right.
Except for the people that were in there. And he also agreed to donate $10,000 to the Brotherhood Crusade. So I said, so Danny was fine with that. So I went there that night, and I had prepared the statement with the idea that Danny Bakewell would read the statement to the audience and also tell them. So when I got there, and I hadn't met Danny, I'd only talked to him on the phone. So I said, well, Danny, here's the statement that Richard wants you to read. He goes, I'm not reading that. He said, you're here, you're his guy. So you go up there and read it. And it was at the shrine. I said, oh man, you're kidding me. Like, You don't
Right.
you really. So I had to go up on stage and tell 5,000 Black people who were expecting Richard Pryor to perform
Right.
and that was really the beginning. It set a pattern of just having to do that all the time. Richard was just one of those guys. He was just unpredictable. And I'd come to the office some days and I just never knew what he was going to. So you just kind of hope that, and then there was other things that he did do. For example, the Richard Pryor live in concert film was was an idea I brought to him that it wasn't my idea to do the concert, but somebody came to me, a guy by the name of Bill Sargent, who I
Bill
think
Sargent, yeah.
I mentioned in the book. He's the guy that offered $50 million for the Beatles to do a reunion tour. And he
Right.
said, hey, I want to do a live concert. And I said, well, I think that's a really great idea. I don't know if I can sell it, and David and Richard gave me their blessings and I helped to put that whole thing together. So you get those kinds of moments and you think, well, if I can do more of that, that offsets those other times when I'm canceling signatory or whatever.
But you gave, I just wanted to give you your props, and at the least in the Richard Pryor chapter, because not only do you account for all of these events, but you also give perspective and where Richard came from and kind of telling his story to give, this kind of 2022, I always say, lens of cause and effect, basically,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Yeah, different, Richard did a lot of things. He never got canceled, like what happened with Dave Chappelle. And, Richard did, people just loved him because he was so vulnerable and he turned his misfortune into comedy in a way that it resonated with people and they forgave him. They always forgave him of everything. And he, as I think you noticed in the book, he created a pattern that was very successful for him in terms of marketing, the way he marketed his fame and his persona.
And his comedy,
tour, live concert film. There's very rare, as a strategic, crisis manager, whatever, the first thing you say is let's do something and let's move away from, let's figure out a way to put that in the past. And he found a way to actually allow that to fuel a lot of his comedy.
I forgot where I read it, but there was a show that he did at the Hollywood Bowl. All I remember, there's a famous photo where he says, "I want you all to kiss my happy black ass," or something.
Yeah.
And he's little. I think it was like he was doing a benefit. It was like a LGBTQ benefit.
You're right. I was representing Bette Midler then.
That Midler story,
concert.
You got that story in here. Yeah.
Yes, it's in the book. So that was a Star Spangled Night for Rights. And Bette Midler's manager, Aaron Russo, came up with the idea. And we, and I really had a big role in that because we met with all these gay, LGBTQ organizations from San Francisco because we donate the money from the concert. And Richard agreed to do it, but I didn't represent Richard then. But I literally was on the stage and I was 6 feet away from him before he went on. And I stayed on the stage because I was such a big fan. I wanted to see him close up. So I was on the wing of the stage watching that all happen. And he walked right by me. After he did that, he walked off the stage and went straight to his limo and left.
I heard it was described, someone said it was the cabaret version of Altamont. If you know what happened.
It was, he freaked out everybody. I mean, he just went, and you could watch him turn as it was, he started off and people were laughing and whatever. And then he just dark and I don't know if he realized there or if he was misled, but he just really turned on the audience.
Can you give me an example? Because oftentimes I see that you are thrown in the front line to strategize something or think of a spin or fix this real quick. Can you just, in your whole career, like what was the one time where you felt like whatever spin you had to put on something that, maybe this might engulf you or kind of you might get drawn into the tornado yourself. Like this is something that you can't handle.
I don't know. I've never thought there's something I couldn't handle.
So you're not handling this with fear, because even then you have to like meet with people. You got to be the bearer of bad news. I'm sorry, my client, blah 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 blah, is not going to make it. Well, you think of
you
something.
learn, you build up a resiliency. Like Richard Pryor taught me how to be resilient because he was constantly,
He forced you to be
Rick
resilient.
James too. Rick James was another guy that tested me, my resolve and my ability to just, because I really admired Rick and thought he had a lot of talent. He was really a skilled musician, and but he was just his own worst enemy. But I always wanted him to win, and I was trying to come up for ways to help him win, because I thought, like, I did feel like he had potential to be bigger than what he was. And it becomes, but I never gave up on that belief, and so that's what fueled my,
But isn't it
my sense.
exhausting? But is it not exhausting to? Is it not exhausting for you sometimes to have to Jedi mind trick your artist? Like
Yeah, no, it is. It is. There's times when I haven't enjoyed being a mop. I'll be honest. I mean, it's not something that I wake up going like, what problem can I fucking fix today? That's not like, I don't wake up with that attitude, but I just always felt comfortable with the pressure that I felt I would be able to, if they trusted me, that I could help them, we could achieve a collaboration. To me, artists and managers is it's a synergy, and it's a shared vision. And, it's not like one or the other. It's if we can share a vision of what we hope to accomplish, and that's what you really hope for, but it's not always possible.
For you, in getting to know some of your clients, do you often get to the heart of the matter? Like, are they talking at all about like, hey, maybe I should see, like, I don't know how prevalent seeing a therapist was to suggest in 1982.
Right.
Or, now, of course, we throw everyone like therapy in the face. And yes, mental health is everything in 2022. But back in 1983, 1984, if you sense that an artist is sort of stuck in that place, like what solutions are there that aren't, what's perceived as embarrassing as, oh, maybe I need to see somebody, therapy wise?
No, I think there were times when I asked people, have you given any thought to getting some help, seeing a therapist, or, to really, do you even think you have a problem? I mean, it seems like you do have a problem. Don Cornelius, he had a brain surgery, and it made him unstable. And
so you were there in 83 when he had his aneurysm?
Yeah, I wasn't close to him then, but by then, let me think. I'm trying to think, when was the first Soul Train Music Awards?
87 or
87.
86.
Yeah, so so it was after it was shortly after that I became more, I started doing PR for him after the brain aneurysm. And he told me about it. But then when we were doing the Soul Train Awards, and I worked on that show for at least 5 years or so, I remember him telling me that it made him moody, and sometimes he didn't know how he was going to react to certain things. And
Right.
you could see it, actually happen in real time a couple of times, different things that he did that I think, were influenced by that. And I remember asking him once, have you thought about going back and, getting another surgery done? And he said, yeah, I have thought about it, and I've talked to the doctors, but the reality is they couldn't guarantee him that he would get better. And it also might even be worse. So, these are things that people, I don't think he told everybody that, but that's something I can say he shared with me. something, and just for him, because he wanted me to understand, and I was trying to understand him, and we had that kind of friendship. I mean, he wasn't like a total open book with me, but there
Not
were
at all.
times when we would sit down and talk for a couple of hours, and he would tell me, the different things, this frustration with just Black people and Black artists that wouldn't support him, and I always tried to help with any artist that I was managing or whatever. Like, we got to do the Soul Train Music Awards, because I knew how hard it was. When artists crossed over, a lot of them forgot that, Don was the one who put him in a position to be on national television.
How long did you work with the Soul Train Awards, the music awards?
Up until probably the first 5 years, I think, or 6 or 7 years, something like that.
All right, so you leased there for 91, 92.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I'm about to
did it.
I'm gonna debunk
Luther
a major
did it.
theory. I have a major theory that I'm afraid to ask you this question because I think I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask this question anyway. So you remember in 91, or technically 92, because this is when the so let's go February of 1992. This is the infamous Michael Jackson crutches period, where, if you remember, he did Remember the Time sitting down. This is what I think happened. And all you have to do is verify if it's true or not. Wait, do you remember this, Laia?
No, in a I didn't remember him doing it in a chair. I know I saw
You
it.
don't
But I
remember?
totally
Oh my God.
I don't
All
remember
right,
him
so,
doing it in a chair.
So there was a period where, like, I'm putting all right. So based on our MC Search story, you remember the MC Search story where Hammer took a hit out
Yeah.
on third base. Right.
Hammer hit third base story.
Right. And then it wound up in Bob Jones's hands, where he had to they had to manufacture an Artist of the Decade award for Michael to win, so that Michael Concepcion could sit next to Michael Jackson in the art. Like, this whole this crazy story happens.
Yeah.
So I have a theory. One, I do not believe. So that was the American Music Awards, which of course is a Dick Clark platform. That was also 89. So in February of 92, Dangerous is out, and Michael is being given a Lifetime Achievement Award or whatever, like a made-up award, and Eddie Murphy and Elizabeth Taylor are presenting it to him, and Michael has crutches on, and sympathy. This is like right after the Oprah interview and everything. So this is like a brief period where, like, empathy is really on Michael Jackson's side. And he performs. He was supposed to perform Remember the Time, but he has to sit in a wheelchair and perform it, and he can't move or whatever. So he's just basically performing from the top of of his. He's just used his shoulders and his neck and whatever. And I don't buy that one bit. I believe that was all. I don't believe that Michael Jackson injured his foot in rehearsals. But I smell only because Michael also had to do Dick Clark's American Music Awards for the same thing. And I know that there's a rivalry between Don and Dick.
Was.
So, what are you proposing, Amir? Come on.
I'm calling foul. I believe that there was a situation between Don and Dick Clark, American Music Awards and Soul Train Awards, which this is Hatfield McCoy territory. And I think the compromise was made that, okay, I still have to perform my song, but I'll sit in a wheelchair and perform it. Or
it was a throne, by the way. It wasn't a wheelchair, it was a throne. But you're right. He never got up.
I mean, yeah, but all right. Can you
I close to? I remember the video because it was like 12 minutes long.
No, not the video. I'm just talking about
The performance.
at Soul Train Awards. You know, it was a
He
really
never
dramatic
gets
thing.
up.
I almost
I don't, the performance doesn't stand out to me, but I just remember
Oh.
that there was a lot of work that went in to get Michael to do the show. And that at that time, you know, Michael had so much clout that he put together a video that was 12 minutes long about himself. And he submitted
Yeah.
it to, if you look back, it
Right
was
before it.
the Grammys, American Music Awards, and
his own sizzle reel.
and the Soul Train Awards had to use that to introduce him. Then that's when, after the video plays, then Eddie Murphy comes out.
Right.
So he made that a mandatory thing that all those major award shows had to do that in order to get him on. And there was always a lot of, if there was a back and forth, if certain black acts did American Bandstand, Don didn't want him on the show, and then the other way around. If a big act did Soul Train first, then Dick Clark wouldn't want him on the show. And this went on the whole time that I was working.
Really?
Yep.
I became aware of you. Of course, during the situation with your ex-wife. Having been around at the time in 1983, 84, you were brought aboard, I guess, to sort of handle her press and whatnot. Can you talk about the situation of how you were brought in to handle, obviously, for those that don't know, you know, it's amazing to me how you ushered, as her manager, like what seemed to be like almost what would have been a tarnished career. Like, you managed to turn Vanessa Williams's whole entire trajectory around and made her way bigger than whatever being a Miss America could have promised her. But how did you get brought into the organization to fix it?
Well, I think that there are two really huge misnomers about that whole situation,
Okay.
which I'm going to clarify for you.
Yes.
That have been part of history and wrongly reported as they're just not authentic. One was that Vanessa had a career when I met her. She didn't
Okay.
have a career. She was a beauty pageant winner. You know, she
Right.
won the Miss America pageant, and what made it more significant for her than other pageant prior winners prior to her was the fact that she was Black. So she was the first Black Miss America in the 63-year history of the pageant.
Right.
She was a sophomore in college, and some woman from the New York State pageant saw her perform in a play and said, wow, you know, you would be great. Have you ever thought of being in a pageant? Her parents were school teachers. She had never been it wasn't a career to be in pageants.
Right.
And when they told her that if you win Miss America, you get $25,000 in scholarship money, she said, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. So she ended up winning Miss New York. And then when you win, you automatically get a bid to compete in the Miss America pageant. And so that all happened in 6 months.
Mhm.
And once she won, I was representing an artist, a painter named Phoebe Beasley, who's pretty well known, and she does, you know, amazing collages and stuff. And she knew a guy named Dennis Dowdell, who was a handler for Vanessa. He was really just a neighbor because her parents were school teachers, and because she was the only Black Miss America, they were being besieged by requests from Black organizations to have Vanessa come and, you know, make appearances, public appearances and such.
Mhm.
So they asked for some help, and Dennis was a corporate lawyer for American Can, and he said, sure, I'll try to help out. And so he was really, and Vanessa did want to have a career in the entertainment business once she finished her reign as Miss America. And so my friend Phoebe, who was a client at the time, said, hey, I wanted to know if I could recommend you to this guy. Do you know who Vanessa Williams is? And I said, yeah, the Black girl that won Miss America. Yeah, I know who she is. And he said, well, she wants to go into the entertainment business. And I said, you should talk to Ramon. He'd be great to add to your team. And so I met with Dennis one time, and he liked me. And yeah, I would like to introduce you to Vanessa. She's on the road every day right now. And I said, yeah, sure. In fact, I was living in LA then. I flew to New York. I had lunch with him in New York, and I said, yeah, I'd be happy to meet with her. And because for me, just being a beauty pageant winner, even though it was Miss America, I didn't think that was an automatic ticket to being successful in the entertainment business. But I said, yeah, if you guys are putting together a team, I'd be interested to see what can happen. And then I didn't hear from him for quite a while. And then this was in July, probably mid-July, I heard from him, and he told me that he needed my advice on something. And so I said, yeah, sure. What do you need? And he said, well, I heard there's some rumors of some pictures of Vanessa, and I don't know if it's legit or not. And I said, well, if you don't know if they're legit, then don't say anything. Don't do anything. I'll see if I can nose around and find out anything. And then a couple of weeks passed. I told him I hadn't found out. I didn't hear any wind of it. And then he said, well, the pictures exist, and what should I do? And I said, well, have you seen the pictures? Has the pageant seen the pictures? He said, no, I don't know if they have or not. And I again told him, don't say anything. If you don't really know what you're up against, then there's no way you curve what the collateral damage will be. If you go out too soon, any kind of crisis, you need to know what you're up against. And so ultimately, the pageant did see the pictures. And this guy, Albert Marks, who was the CEO of the pageant and had been for, I don't know, 50 years or whatever, he requested that Vanessa resign. Didn't demand it, he requested it. And that's another thing that a lot of people, whenever it's been reported that she was forced to resign, she wasn't forced to resign. She was requested. And the reason they requested it, because he didn't know legally whether they could actually fire her. And he didn't want to go into litigation on it. That's why he never said it. So he gave her 72 hours to respond. And that's when Dennis called me and said, what should I said, well, now we can do something. Now we have, do you want me to control this and tell you guys what to do? Or do you want me just to tell you whatever you want me to do, I'll try to help out. He goes, no, I want you to manage it, take care of it, whatever. So on a Friday night, in LA, on Friday afternoon in LA, I had 72 hours basically from the time that he had not announced it, which was around 11 o'clock on Friday morning, New York time. By the time I found out about it, it was a little later. And so I said, here's what I think we should do. We should have a press conference in New York. I'll put it together. I don't care what, if she's going to resign, if she doesn't resign, I don't need to know that right now, but I need to put together a photo news alert and get a commitment and see if we have enough press people that'll come out to the press conference. And then what we'll do is we'll have one statement, and that's what we'll do. And I said,
can I ask, like, was there not a person like the shiesty person that's trying to like blackmail, like, I have these photos and I want, $100,000 or nothing? Like, was there none of that?
Guccione had already had the magazine had her picture on the cover. That's what we saw. He was about to publish
so he printed it with so yeah, it's not
he claimed that he had a model release. So he had been planning this whole thing. He had planned it to happen before she ended her reign as Miss America. He wanted it to happen before the next Miss America was crowned, which was going to be a few weeks away.
So there wasn't
6 weeks left.
There wasn't at least a pre-phone call, like, how much for me to not destroy your life right now? None of that.
No, he connived and planned the whole thing.
And how was she this whole time? Like, what were her feelings? Was she angry? Was she like,
well, I hadn't met her. I had never even met her.
Wow.
So what happened is she ended up confessing to Dennis that she did take the pictures, but she didn't sign a model release. And so that part I knew about. before I came involved, but I literally got involved with 72 hours. My job was to come to a solution on how we're going to deal with this announcement. And I suggested the announcement so that she could go on with her life. One time, don't answer any questions from the press. You're going to do a statement. I'm going to hand the statement out to all the press. I hired an affiliate company in New York, a good friend of mine, to help me set it up. And then that night I took a red eye to New York. I went and met her family. And on the way, this guy came, picked me up at the airport at JFK. I drove out to Millwood, where they live in Westchester County. And on the way there, Dennis told me there was going to be a lawsuit.
Syracuse
I
girl.
go, okay, that's a lawsuit, huh? So we got it. So now I'm finding out I'm going to have to deal with lawyers, and they're going to have input on what the press statement can be. And when I got to Millwood, there was over 450 media people, like an encampment, had taken over her neighborhood,
Yeah.
front lawn, across the street and everything. And that was the first time when you said that, did I have fear? I had fear then, because I said, wow, this is a much bigger thing than I realized. Because in LA, it wasn't, when I was in, I just didn't, even the fact that she won Miss America was not, it was like a one-page picture on the front page of the LA Times. But in New York, because she was from New York, she was Miss New York, it was huge. And so all these people were waiting, and they didn't even know where she was. She was at home, but they were just waiting to get a glimpse and everything. And so when I went in there, I met the parents, and I met Vanessa probably at around 8 o'clock in the morning. And most of the, then the lawyers showed up. And at that time, everybody wanted to, said that they were going to fight, and they weren't going to let her resign, that they were going to, but my feeling was based on the fact that there was only 6 weeks left before the national broadcast. And I felt in my heart that the pageant was not going to
support.
They weren't going to let her, be on that show, for one. And I didn't think that there could be an injunction, whether they could get an injunction or not, they're not going to let her perform any of her services that she was supposed to deliver as Miss America. So why fight for it? What are you fighting for? You have nothing. The only thing left for you to do is to be on that show and give the other girl the new crown.
Yeah.
And is that really worth it? Just go on with your life. But I wasn't in charge, they had lawyers, the parents had input. So I said, hey, whatever you guys want to do, I'm going to frame this statement to represent Vanessa's voice. And so I worked with Vanessa over the course of that, within that 72 hours, we bantered about with the lawyers. And at one time they were saying, well, she can't say this and she can't say that. I say, well, look, guys, if she can't say anything, then let's just cancel the press conference. You guys can do your lawyer shit and just make a legalese announcement, and just it'll make it like a law release instead of a press release. And I'll be happy to service that for you guys. And then we changed, we went back and forth. And then ultimately in the book, I explain what everything ended up happening. But she did end up, the world knows that she did end up resigning, but she had the option not to. That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize. They didn't force her out, but she decided to. And I think she did the right thing.
Hell yeah.
By resigning.
Two minor questions. One, only because I went to school with her. Did she ever have a conversation with Suzette? In terms of Suzette, so Suzette Charles, was the runner-up, and it was just Jersey, but she's really Philly. And I went to school she was my sister's best friend, so we all went to the same school.
You really know her.
Oh, I definitely. I mean, I'm sorry, I was cheering for Suzette the whole time, but but
that's cool. I wasn't cheering for anybody.
And she's African American as well. She's black. She's a black woman as well.
Right.
Was there? Did they ever have a conversation about this during this time period, or
no?
Just both camps were separate.
They were both separate. And if I would have been Suzanne's manager, I would have told her, "Don't accept it."
I always, now in hindsight, I wonder.
She would have been more famous. She would have been more famous had she not accepted it. Because it's like one black woman, like, you're going to do this to a black woman, and then I'm going to slide in there. And she never, I mean, she was only Miss America for 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Why
Yeah.
would you accept that?
Thank
You
God
know,
Amir said
it
her
was
name.
like peons, like pennies. And she never got to do after that. I mean, you know, she's not one of the most, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
Miss Americas are not recognized, but Suzette Charles is probably the one of the least recognized because she accepted that.
Well, everybody ain't have a Ramon, so what you gonna do?
And I would have
That's
told her,
right.
I said, no, don't.
Wrong
She'll be
spin.
more famous. I
So-
mean, she would have been all over the news. She could have had her own press conference to say why she didn't accept it.
Right.
Woo!
I was going to ask you also, what were your feelings when I guess 37 years later, they tried to pull a mea culpa and say, okay, we were wrong, and that was tone deaf of us, and we want to reinstate you back as Miss America. And I assume she declined it, but were you even aware that maybe 7-8 years ago that organization actually
I
wanted to
knew,
right
I
the
knew all
wrong and-
about it. She called me. She asked me what I thought she should do.
and you told her still no?
I said, no, why would you go back to them?
Yeah,
You
she
don't
made
have
them
nothing to
pop.
gain. But you know, she did. I mean, I think she did it for her parents, for her mom.
Oh, she
Sweet.
ended up doing it.
She
Okay.
ended up supporting them.
Mm.
She didn't actually do what they wanted, but they did reach you know, she's held in a different light now than she was. And I said, hey, it's up to you. I wouldn't do it if I were you, but you know,
Please.
it's your life. And if you guys want to, if you want to have peace and you get some benefit out of it, then do it.
She's the
I was
most
gonna
famous
say-
Miss America of all times, isn't she?
Yeah.
I mean, former Miss America of all time.
Or yeah, wait.
But
more
it took a
famous than
long
Miss-
time, you know, it took a long time for all that stuff to really put it behind her. A lot of people say any publicity is good publicity, and I'm not
Nah.
from that school of thought. It took over a decade before she could actually be listed by her name only, meaning for 10 years, every time she was in the paper, there was
Ex-Miss
some
Miss
reference
America.
to the
Former.
former new pictures, Miss America. It was like a tag, you know, it's
Right.
like, you know, having a monkey on your back, only it was in writing. It was like literally like a brand tag, you know, new Miss America forced to resign because of nude pictures, some wording. It was always every time, you know. And I said, if we could, you know, for me, my biggest goal was if I could just have one person say, just use her name without any reference to the past. And it finally happened. A journalist by the name of David Rich, who's a well-known Broadway critic, when
Mhm.
she was in Kiss of the Spider Woman,
Hmm.
for her review, he was the first one
Really?
that didn't
Wow.
use the reference. And I went,
Okay.
fucking A, man, we finally won. We finally
So
got your
how did
name
you-
back.
So, you know, during this period, like, you know, you're saying like we barely met and we met at 8 a.m. So obviously you're like, you have no idea that your children are about to be filtered like through this woman that you're representing. She's
Filter
just,
through this woman.
well,
Like that
I mean,
word.
but you described it so matter of fact, like, you know, and then I went up to, you know, to the house and I met and saw the press people. So obviously,
No, that wasn't on my mind.
right, it wasn't a stars in your eyes moment.
Yeah.
But so at what point did you take a bigger role in kind of engineering and, you know, watching the initial launch of, you know, her 87 the right Stuff album and the Comfort Zone album, and how you just really managed to do the impossible, which is like anyone associated with Miss America, it's almost like that would have been a sure shot way to almost like career suicide, but somehow you managed to make her into a household word and an international star. So could you just describe what the
Well,
basic strategy was?
I continued to be her publicist for a while. And
So you were just a publicist, never a manager.
No, I was her manager a much longer time than I was her publicist. I was her publicist for less than 6 months, probably, or maybe less than a year. But I was her manager for over 10 years. But what ended up happening was I didn't want to manage her because I had worked with so many other people who either their mother or their husband or different people in the business who were managed by their mother or their husbands or whatever. And I said, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be an appendage to Vanessa as a manager. And I told her that, and I said, but I'll find you a good manager. I'll help you, and I tried to find her a good manager, and everybody said, no. And so finally, she did have a woman by the name of Dolores Robinson, who's a pretty well-respected manager in the business, and they didn't work out. And then one day she just said, well, why don't you just manage me? I come to you for everything anyways. I'm not going to do anything without getting your advice. So why don't you just do it? And I finally, I mean, you don't like to make decisions out of emotional decisions, but I really did it out of love for her because I wanted to see her, I wanted her to be happy. And so I finally committed to it. And I said, look, I want to do it, but the vision is, I don't think I can make you a star in Broadway and motion pictures or TV because there's not a lot of parts for Black women. And what we have to do is come up with an identity that you can own. And I think the best way to do that is in the music industry because we can brand you. I can't brand you waiting for the right role to come up, and you can, people know that you can sing. You won so what we have to do is create an identity that is not Miss America because you don't really represent Miss America and you don't really represent the pictures. So they were diametrically opposed. So if we can find music and you give me an opportunity to do that, then I think we can create. And if we fail, then we'll try plan B. But let's try to go the music route and try to brand you and create an identity that you can own, and then we can build. And then hopefully that'll be a caveat and a pathway for you to do film, television, Broadway, and all the other stuff. But then what I didn't realize was that, the stigma of what everything that had happened. I mean, everyone turned me down. Bob Krasnow,
Every
Gerald
label.
Busby.
Right.
I got turned down by like 8 labels. Clive Calder, I remember he told me, he said, well, I kind of see Vanessa as, this is kind of like a page 3, like in the Sun in the UK. Like that's how what people kind of think of her might be. Like maybe she could be a celebrity, but I don't think anybody will ever take her serious as an artist. And he told me that.
She could
And
sing.
he
She could
finally,
sing.
this is in his office, me and Vanessa, he said this in front of Vanessa too. And,
Thank God for that
so I was
Epstein
getting
boy.
turned down left and right, but Clive was actually, he sent me a really nice note. And he said, everything you told me you were going to do in that meeting, you did. And I blew it. And I was so happy
really?
that he owned up to that, because I told him, I said, no, I don't want a demo deal. I want a real deal. We'll make her a legitimate artist. And the guy who really came to the table was Ed Eckstein.
Yep.
And Ed was called me at that time. He had just gotten a deal with Wing Records to be, to start Wing Records. And he had one group signed at the time, Tony.
Right.
And so he was just telling me, we were friends, and he said, hey man, I got this new label. So if you got anybody, please run them by me. And he knew that, at this point, Vanessa and I had a relationship. People knew about it and everything. So, at the end of our conversation, I say, hey, I don't have anybody right now. But he said, well, what are you doing with Vanessa? And I said, well, I'm trying to get her a damn record deal, but everyone wants to do a demo. And I don't want to get, demo deals are like purgatory. You
right.
get a demo deal, then all of a sudden they reject you. Then nobody wants to touch you. And I said, I don't want to go that route. So he just said, well, why don't you come here? Let's do it. And I said, really?
Wow.
Are you serious? And he said, yeah, I don't have any money. I don't have any kind of real money, but I can give you some money. So we bartered it a little bit. There wasn't a lot of room. I negotiated a little bit more, and that's where we started. And so it was the 3 of us, and that was the beginning of her musical career. And then the rest is, history. And, I think I did have a big role in that first decade of her career and everything that the one thing I was disappointed about was we didn't get a chance to do a major tour And I thought that that was
Right.
something that I would have loved for her to dedicate and stay more entrenched in the music industry to really launch a major tour while I was still at her helm. And then our relationship started, by this time we had 3 kids.
Right.
And,
Have
I
you-
don't regret any of the time that we spent together. We were very successful in our run, and she's gone on to do really great things.
I have to ask, have you guys ever forgiven LA and Babyface for giving Girlfriend away to Pebbles instead of?
Yeah, that was a total that was a total money deal. Like Ed and Vanessa, man, they hated them. I
Yeah.
think you read in the book where I ran into LA and Babyface in the Forum Club. That was
Yeah.
so fucking funny, man. I was cracking up.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I didn't have the hate for them. I just didn't like the business ethics that they exercise. And all they had to do was call. It was a money deal,
Right.
And also we didn't have, what a lot of people don't realize is we didn't have a contract with them.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing we were doing a spec deal with them because they brought, we wanted them to write original material and write and produce original material for Vanessa
Right.
on her debut album. And they came with 4 songs, and we didn't really like most of the 3 of the songs we didn't feel were right.
Right.
But Girlfriend was one that we thought was interesting. Wasn't really the direction we were thinking, but we said, let's do this song, switch and let Vanessa put her lead vocals on it. And we'll do it as a spec. And if everything goes well, then we'll commit 3 songs for the album.
So there's a version of Girlfriend with her voice on it somewhere in this world.
That's what Pebbles heard. Pebbles came to the apartment.
I mean, she does have the stronger voice, Vanessa.
The Oakwood,
Boy.
the Oakwood Apartments was where LA and Face came
Right.
and they were just trying to, they had just left the group, The Deal, and they
Right.
were trying to, they had the Whisper song
Right.
that was a big hit.
Rocksteady.
So they were, Rocksteady, and so they were just starting off, and they came to LA to, mind some business and make money, try to get some deals, some songwriting production deals. And so what happened was they were at that place, and Pebbles was also starting her first record with MCA. And she came in and heard, I think Vanessa was actually at the place when Pebbles came in, and she heard her voice, a slave of her voice, on that track, on Girlfriend. And then when Vanessa left, she said to LA, I want that song. And then Busby got involved, and her husband had money.
Right.
And
We heard.
Yeah, so it was a money switch.
We
because
heard.
we didn't have a deal. We were on spec. And so when they got the money, they just didn't have the guts to tell us that they were going to go. And also, in all fairness to them, Vanessa was pregnant.
Oh,
and
okay.
we were going to have to delay the record.
Kiss
So
of
they weren't
90
gonna make
Singers
the
Death.
money. And
Right.
and Kenny also thought that it was a more of an urban track, that it wasn't that Pebbles had a better voice. She had a more urban voice than Vanessa.
Yeah,
that
Baby
they-
said that she was Girlfriend. Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard you say that.
Girlfriend. I can hear it.
Uh-huh.
Girlfriend. I can hear it.
So I got
That
one
was
more
Kenny. That was Kenny. Who
We know.
said he said that, but he let LA kind of take the blame for it. But no, so I told him when I saw them at the Forum Club, look, I don't hate you guys, but you guys should have called, man. That's the only thing. Just out of courtesy, just call
Right.
and say, hey, I understood that you guys did it for money, and your point in your career that made sense, but all you had to do was call us.
So okay, I'm gonna close here because I could nerd out for 12 hours. I do want to know though, at least for when your daughter, and of course your daughter's Jillian, she's Lion Babe, when she's expressing interest in getting in the biz and knowing what knowing who you dealt with, all these casting characters that you meet, and there's a lot of heartbreak here, in the clients that you're working with. Like, what advice are you being encouraging? Like, I wish you would try something else, or da 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 da, or like, or were you the encouraging dad that's like, go ahead, follow your dream. This is what you want to do.
Yeah, no, I never gave her any discouraging news or suggestions about. I didn't throw my history on her in that respect.
Okay.
And give her, the dark side of our business, which, as you know, there's a lot of darkness in our business. But I did try to. She was like hands off. First of all, she goes, "Dad, it's not ready for your ears yet." So she was right.
So she's very guarded with the.
Yeah, she was very guarded, and she told me she was working on one song, and she would play it for me when it was ready. And I said, well, I listen to all kinds of songs. I listen to medleys, just piano or guitar, just let me hear it. I just like to hear what your direction is. And she goes, no, Dad, I'm not ready to play it for you yet. I said, okay. So she did end up coming to me with Treat Me Like Fire. And finally, when there was a rough demo of it that she was happy with, at least to let me listen to, I made some suggestions on it. But she and Lucas pretty much formulated all their own imaging and everything. I didn't have any input or anything. I just kind of let them do what they wanted to do. And I remember seeing the video when she had all that hair. I'd never seen so much hair. She always had wild hair, but this was like, this was like hair on steroids.
Right.
Like,
yeah. That's how I first met her. I was like, wait, who's this person? She like, oh, okay.
How did you get all that hair? That's like the most, so, but what ended up happening was, because I was her father, everyone thought I managed her. And so when they put the single out on SoundCloud, I mean, it was just like an immediate response, like a visceral response, and everybody fell in love with the track. And so I was getting all these calls from labels and lawyers and managers and say, hey, Ramon, man, are you managing your daughter? What's going on? What's going on? I said, no, I'm not. I'm just her dad. I can pass on the information.
That must have felt good, though.
Lucas.
I'm just her dad.
Yeah. So no, what ended up happening,
advising.
I said, I will help you. I don't want to manage you, forever, but you guys need help. And I'd like to offer my services to, set you a sale. Because I never wanted to wake up and, because I had managed their mother, I said this whole idea of managing my daughter and waking up one day and saying, Dad, I love you, but you're fired. I'm not going to be around for that. So I just said, I'm going to help you. And so I did. I helped them get a manager. I flew to London and they ended up signing to Outsiders, a small label that was distributed by Polydor UK, and Amanda Ghost. Did you ever run or meet Amanda Ghost?
I've not met Amanda Ghost.
Okay, so she was a successful songwriter. She was a president of Epic Records for about 6 months or so.
Okay.
She was on American Idol as a judge for a minute.
Okay.
So she had some some traction in the music industry, and she fell in love with the group. And so I helped to negotiate that deal. I set them up with an attorney. And then I went over to London to help them, since they were going to be signed to a London-based label. I said, you guys should get a London-based manager as well, who has, tentacles in the US market, because you got to still release the record here in the US. And I wanted them to know that I was going to be out of the picture. I didn't want a manager thinking that I was going to be second guessing everything that they did. And so I met with everyone and I said, look, my role, if they decide to go with you, I'm out. I'm just a regular dad. You don't have to answer to me. You don't have to copy me on anything. Your relationship will be with Lucas and Jillian, not me.
Wow.
And I just felt that was my responsibility, to give them clear sailing, and to let them manifest their career however they saw it. And so that
good
was
parenting.
That's the role that
very good parenting. I want to thank you for doing this for us. Again.
Oh, thank Deanna too. I want to thank Deanna. Thank you, Deanna. Because
yes, Deanna, she's your godmother, right?
Yes, sir.
Just to let our viewers know, yes, I feel like it's imperative reading The Fame Game, an insider's playbook on earning your 15 minutes. HarperCollins, shout out to HarperCollins. But yes, I think it's required reading.
Yes, I have notes. I have written notes inside. That's how good it is.
Yeah, it's really a really good journey into and it makes me think twice about working with any artist ever again. So yeah.
Word.
Anyway, on behalf of Sir Bill, I'm calling you now, Sir Bill.
I'll take it. Royal
Bill and Mr. Bay City Rollers down there, Sugar Steve.
This
know,
is
I
a
have a new-
Saturday night.
I have a new
There you go,
appreciation.
We
man.
got to pay for that,
City and
man.
Rollers, man. I didn't even. I mean, they had. I went to several of their big concerts back in the day when they performed. One was at a racetrack. I mean, they were getting run over by women were chasing them.
And
But I've
Steve.
never seen anything like that. That's pretty amazing, man.
Nah,
Yeah.
it's even a lot for me. Anyway, on behalf of Bill and Steve and Fontigolo and Lightyear, we thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I really
Thank
had fun. This was really great, and I really
Yes.
appreciate your support. And thank
we'll see you
so much.
On the next go around of Questlove Supreme. Thank you very much.
All right, take
Hey,
care.
y'all.